Good evening and welcome back to Town Meeting Television. We are in the thick of Town Meeting season 2025. Don't forget, you get to vote on the 4th of March 2025. And for those of you in Burlington, we have a special treat tonight because we're going to be talking about the charter changes and the ballot items that actually involve money. Those are the revenue bonds and the GO bonds. And we have today, to help us through it, the mayor, Emma Mulvaney-Stanak, thank you so much, the fire chief, Mike LaChance, and the head of the water department, which is Moir. And this is, I just want to say, we're going to start with the big picture items, the charter changes, but I was thinking, didn't we just do a water bond to improve the entire infrastructure? And then I realized that it was 1985. So I think it's probably time.
Yes,
So.
we have done a small one in between, but we can talk about that.
Yeah. But having said that, it just gives you an idea of how long I've been doing these. Mm-hmm. Welcome, Mayor.
Well, thank you so much for having us and part of the really big team from the city that's been working diligently on all three bonds, as well as the three charters we're putting to voters on Town Meeting Day. So I thought I'd first start with just a little bit of helpful reminders of how to vote and how we do that in the city of Burlington, and then talk about the three charters. My two colleagues here tonight are going to go more into the details of the bonds, and actually Chief LaChance and I are going to tag team. It'll be very exciting on the GO bond, the general obligation bond. But I just want to remind voters that Town Meeting Day is March 4th, and in the city of Burlington, all residents who are registered to vote receive a ballot in the mail. We expect to send those out around February 10th or so. We're also planning to put, probably for one of the first times, an educational piece of just information about what they'll find on the items of the ballot, because sometimes the legalese can be a little confusing. So we'll include some just easy ways you can find some plain language to explain all three of the bonds we'll cover in this show, as well as the charter changes. We're partnering with the school district to also provide a little information on the school budget to make sure people can dive in and get some real plain language around what they're being asked to weigh in on. So we think that's a really good voter education moment. Also unique to the city of Burlington is that we have all resident voting, which means that people who are here, who are not U.S. citizens but have legal status and live here full time, also get to vote on local matters, which is one of the things I really love about the city of Burlington, to make sure we have real democracy for everyone who lives here, who pays taxes, who engages in our wonderful city. So folks, of course, will get those ballots. You can mail them back, but you can also drop them at ballot boxes or right at City Hall, or vote in person. There's a lot of really great bake sales out there on Town Meeting Day, and I wouldn't want to prevent anyone from going in and getting a pile of brownies to support our schools. So that's how people will vote. There's a lot of information on the city website. It includes how you can register to vote online or registering same day. But all the information, again, that we will go over have dedicated web pages on our website. So hopefully everything, if you miss something, we talk too fast, or whatever it might be, you can go back and go in way more depth on any of the items. So I'll start with the three charters that we have. So the charter, the city charter, is basically the city of Burlington's constitution, if you will. It's the most important governing document that we have in the city, and it's where our enabling language comes to then build off ordinances, which you could think about are like the local laws, like state statute. It's the ordinances are like the local version of that. And the charter actually is state law. So in Vermont, as with every other town, when we want to change our little charter, our constitution, we have to go first through the city council and mayor process, and then to voters, and then to the General Assembly, which is the Vermont legislature. And so we take this seriously, and we try to be really thoughtful about what we change in our charter. And there are three things that we're going to update in our charter and bring to voters on town meeting. The first one is one that might look familiar to voters who've been here for a while. In 2014, we had very similar language around banning firearms in places that serve alcohol. The language is almost exactly the same. And we really feel like this, frankly, I voted for this back in 2014. It's long overdue, and even though about 70% of voters at the time supported that charter change, it got stuck in the legislature. As I mentioned, it does need to go through and get affirmative vote from the legislature and then signed by the governor. It didn't make it through the process last time. So for a number of reasons, including the tragic shooting that happened on Church Street this summer, we know that, unfortunately, guns and alcohol do not mix. It's a dangerous combination. education. We want to make sure we have safer workplaces for people who work in establishments that serve alcohol, for the customers, for our police officers, for our first responders. We want to make sure that we, frankly, are disarming these very vulnerable places where people are consuming alcohol. We also think that this is really important strategy for making sure we have less guns in our community, and that we have build a culture of knowing that guns do not make people safe by carrying them. If anything, they become really a liability and create dangerous situations, which again we saw unfortunately in that tragic incident on Church Street. So we are bringing it back to voters. We hope people will vote yes, of course, but there's more information on the website regarding that charter. The second one is something that will be really interesting for renters, all voters, but renters as well. It's to update our language around our renter notification enabling language in the charter. The change of the language will allow the City Council to establish ordinances to regulate lease termination notices, which is required now, but we want to establish more rules around that, as well as notification around rent increases, especially for vulnerable populations. And that would include people living with disabilities, seniors, et cetera, folks where a bump in rent has a pretty dramatic impact on people's economic well-being. So this particular piece is a good example of we have to change language in the charter, but we'll do more detailed review if it passes through all stages, and then we get into the ordinance drafting process. So Burlingtonians can come to ordinance committees and get more in the details. So what you read on the ballot is not the full piece of policy. It enables us to go deeper into development of ordinances. And then finally, for the real election dorks out there, is our third charter on, I know some of them are out there, about redistricting and how we do that. So every 10 years, we do a U.S. Census, and both local municipalities and the state have to look at all of the election boundaries. So in our case, it's wards and city districts. For the legislature, it would be legislative districts and senatorial districts. And so this will, frankly, modernize our language. Right now, every single street change we do has to be written into the charter. It's an old way of doing it. It's cumbersome. It's not unnecessary to send that kind of word change down to the legislature. So we want to make sure that we're making this a more streamlined process where we will be able to enable City Council and voters locally to make those changes when we have a census update. So those are the three charters.
That people want more information on those, they can look at the language online or when they get their ballots in the mail. Why don't we start now with the money numbers, because that's where
the money.
people get the most worked up.
Indeed. Well, Chief LaChance is here to help co-present the Go Bond information. I'm going to have a couple slides which I will help to walk people through. And the reason why the Chief is here is because a lot of the elements included in a Go Bond are items that we aren't able to fund through our operating expenses of the general fund. And so there's still a critical infrastructure. And the Chief, for example, sits on our capital committee that oversees fleet and other pieces that are supported by our bond. And he'll give a few examples when we get to those particular slides for dramatic effect. Right?
Can I just ask you a quick question? A general obligation bond is different from a revenue bond, and we're going to be talking about revenue bonds. And what is a general obligation bond? Why does it need 66% or 2/3 of the voters?
Right. So a Go Bond, general obligation bond, the ultimate responsible party are property taxpayers, and so that would be the obligation of all property taxpayers to pay back that bond over the course of the life of it, both the size, the debt incurred, the interest, et cetera. Versus we have several revenue funds. Water is one of them. In November, we had a revenue bond that was for Burlington Electric Department. Ratepayers are the ones who are obligated, and so there's a different threshold legally for that. And Megan can probably explain why that exactly is the case around revenues. Do you want to?
I actually don't know why it is 50%. I just know that when you have an enterprise fund, and so we actually have 3 separate utilities: stormwater, wastewater, and water, and it means that the enterprise funds, our utilities, are not supported at all by the taxes. They are entirely supported by what people pay on their water bill. So when you pay your water portion of your bill, that goes into that bucket, and so on and so forth, and all the money has to be kept separate. But I'll actually have to look into why it's 50% versus the 2/3. That's a really good question. I just know that it's good for us.
Well, and the threshold for this bond that we're about to talk about is 2/3. So it's going to need more than a majority support. So why don't we learn about it and how it will help improve our fleet?
Great. And I'll have
traffic
the chief
calming.
actually talk about the first part, and if you want to show the slide we have up now about the need for this bond, you'll see it begins with our fleet. Do you want to talk, Chief, just briefly, what is fleet?
Sure, fleet. We have over almost 250 fleet assets in the city. Fire trucks, police cars, sidewalk tractors, plow trucks, lawn mowers, all of those things that we use to keep the city up. Some of the larger fleet needs, like fire trucks and snow plows, things like that, are very expensive. So we are not able currently to fund those by just general fund expenditures. So we do bond for them typically. And the issue right now with a lot of these things, it's really a big issue since COVID, is it takes so doggone long to get them. When we order a fire truck now, we're 3 to 4 years to get the truck received. So, and being that the city is doing its best to be good stewards of the funding, we do our best to have the financing figured out before we place the order. We don't want to place the order and say, well, we'll figure it out later. That's not really good stewards of taxpayer dollars. So we do our best to have the funding right up front, and also if you can do that, if you can maybe prepay for some of these large fleet vehicles, you actually can get some prepaid discounts that we like to be able to jump onto. So, so that's what we're doing with some of this fleet money. But just trying to get caught up. About 30% of our fleet we're behind on right now as far as replacement. So we're honestly we have some work to do to get caught up on fleet, and this bond will go a long way to help us do that.
And for people that follow Town Meeting TV and the elections, you'll often see the town of Williston will be coming up for one fire truck. And they'll want some money for the one fire truck. But this is really a much bigger fleet, and for all the reasons you just explained.
Yeah.
And the chief was also explaining to me that, the cost of everything is going up, right? So the longer we would defer putting the order in for the new fire truck, the more expensive these things come.
Right.
And I think that is a theme you'll hear throughout all three of these bonds. The more we defer maintenance, the more we defer the purchase of, or we do one less mile of sidewalk, it becomes that much more expensive in the outer years. So we're really presenting to voters a real team effort of what we think is necessary, responsible, and a deep investment to catch us up from critical infrastructure that we have not always kept up on. And what you'll see on this slide again is that right now, based on that charter I talked about before, the city of Burlington's allowed $2 million in bonding every year for capital needs, but that is a very small amount for the city today with all of the increased costs and expenses out there. $2 million does not go very far. It would maybe get one fire truck, 2 fire trucks maybe, but then nothing else
Right.
that we need, right? And you'll see again on the slide is sidewalks and streets and a local match for the Winooski Bridge project, which is critical. That bridge is quite old and needs not only to be replaced, but we need to keep our part of the partnership with the city of Winooski and the state of Vermont. There's also, we own 19 different buildings, a lot of facilities owned by the city, and I always remind people we have a glaring example of when we don't keep up our own asset, which is Memorial Auditorium, and we have to do our due diligence, otherwise things start to fall apart and frankly come offline, and that is a huge loss to the legacy of these buildings for which people steward before us, and we want to make sure we're keeping up. So this is a little bit more just on terms of how the money would potentially be spent out, just so people get a sense between our buildings and our transportation needs, our fleet that we spoke about, as well as our streets. Generally, paving about 3 miles of sidewalk, for example, is about $3 million a year. We're also trying to look at the transportation safety piece. A lot of Burlingtonians have a lot of feelings, and it's really important feelings around traffic calming projects. This is part of community safety. And so $300,000 a year will help us start to get through most of the majority of the requests we've received from residents. This is another breakdown percentage-wise. It's not set in stone, just to modify people's expectations, but to get a sense of how we're thinking about spreading this out across those different capital needs. And a little bit on before I go to there, on this website, there's also a great interactive map that staff have developed. You can zone in on your part of the city and see what of this percentage split would be happening in your neck of the woods, as well as a survey we would like people to participate in to give us a sense of, in this percentage, what should we prioritize more versus not. And that participation is really important to the city. So everyone wants to know about tax impact, right? So this is a little bit of a slide that people can spend more time with online around our debt policy, which is the debt limit. You'll see the sort of non-dash line, the full line there above the bar graph. And then we're building a new high school. So this gives you an idea around our debt obligation and how it starts to step down in the next couple years and a lot more in the outer years. This is why we felt this is a responsible bond to bring forward for the $20 million bond to property taxpayers, because we have our bonding pressures start to alleviate in the next coming years. And this is an important time for us not to have to continue to defer, again, what I said before, and have more expenses that are more expensive in the future. You can see some lovely photos of some of our facilities that are in dire need of upgrades. That one in the middle is on the floor of the Burlington Police Department, for example. There are bulges and all sorts of things that critically need upgrades. This community is talking a lot about what we need to recruit and retain officers and professional staff at the Burlington Police Department. Having investments in our immediate building while we figure out how to build a more modern facility at some point in the near future. This is the type of stuff that we're really literally talking about. It is not with likes, it's must-haves at this point to really upkeep. And then finally, I'll just wrap up on this because we want to give time for our water-related bonds, but the effects on the tax bill. So this is an estimate. With every bond, you don't go out for the full $20 million all at once. We expect this to be about a 3-year bond. You can get a sense in the table to the right or your left, depending on how you're viewing this at home, of how we would spend. We would go out for about $7 million in year 1, 6.5, and then 6.5. That helps us keep this in an affordable bandwidth for taxpayers. And you'll see on an average house a house valued at $500,000. The monthly expected tax increase is a little less than $12 a month. These are important investments for this city that we care so much about and we want to make sure is vibrant.
And is that $12 a month this year or $12 a month as you increase the bonding capacity?
That is small increases starting in the fiscal year 26. I believe that's when the full $20 million is expended. Yes?
Yeah.
Yes. I'm not usually the person who presents this. I've seen it a lot,
No,
so that's hopefully the right answer.
Yeah.
But he's saying yes.
Yeah, that's good to know,
Yeah.
because it's not as if we're going to be paying $250 a year more on a $500,000 house this year.
Yep.
Which is important to keep in mind because we have some other implications as ratepayers.
We do.
Yeah.
Right.
So I just want to ask you how you, just in general, if you were to evaluate sort of the physical assets and the human assets of our public safety departments, fire and police, what's your evaluation? How should me as a taxpayer feel about how we're doing and how we're taking care of things?
I think physical assets, as far as staffing is concerned, I think we're doing pretty well in the fire department. The police department, we know, struggles with staffing a little bit, but they're working really hard to get their staffing up, and we appreciate them for that for sure. Fire department staffing is very solid. We could use some work on the facilities though. We have come a long way in the last go bond. We used some money to create some bedroom space for a more diverse workforce at Fire Station 2. That was a single bunk room, and we were able to create bedrooms out of that in a building from the 80s. We had 1 bathroom, now we have 2 separate shower spaces, which is really nice. We have some work that we need to do with apparatus floors. Station 2 and Station 1, so on North Avenue and South Winooski Avenue, have apparatus floors that need some significant work. Some of this GO bond money will go toward that. With the last bond, we were able to upgrade the entire radio system in the city. That covers police, fire, and Department of Public Works. That project is coming to a close, and what a difference. It is an amazing radio system now, clear as a bell. We love it. So we've done a lot of really good infrastructure work. We have a new station alerting system at the firehouse. A lot of really good infrastructure work. A lot of things that are good for our responders. The equipment now is great. We have great equipment. We really appreciate the folks at Burlington for supporting us with that. The issue is that 3 and 4 year turnaround time for trucks. You can't wait until you need it to order it, and that's where we are right now. We have to be on it for what do we need in 2028, 2029, and we have to get on that right now.
Thank you, Chief. That's very helpful.
Thank you.
All right, on to the water.
And I'm ready.
Yes.
To drive.
Go ahead and. So hopefully a lot of people have seen presentation. We've been to NPAs, city council, so on and so forth. But the fact of the matter is, even though the voters supported an initial bond in 2018 after the wastewater systems had a number of failures, even once we spent that money out, folks can look at the slide, there's still a significant portion, particularly on the wastewater treatment plant side of our systems, that don't have a great grade. It would be, C- or worse. And that's just not a sustainable thing for Burlington to have, given our relationship to the lake. So a big portion of the what we're calling the lake bond, which is actually for wastewater and stormwater, is going to be going towards just simple replacement of existing infrastructure. You mentioned the last time we bonded for wastewater, I think it actually was in the 80s, and then it took actually until the 90s to fully implement those repairs. But that means that the wastewater treatment plant is a 30-year-old plant. Most wastewater treatment plants are upgraded on a 20 or 25-year cycle, and so we're already kind of behind the times. One thing that the mayor and the chief were talking about is, what's the cost of not doing these investments in these bonds? And there's a lot of sunken costs. You can keep a fire truck running, but you're going to spend so much money just keeping it running because you need it, versus at some point, we all know, like when your car needs a 50% investment, you need to cut bait and go ahead and look at trying to get a new car. And that's some of what we're trying to do, is save the ratepayers and the taxpayers long term by addressing those issues. If you go back to the slide, there you go.
Want to go back one?
Yeah, just real quick. The other piece that we are doing at the wastewater treatment plants is, Burlington has changed its zoning code so that there now is the opportunity for growth. The state is talking about growth on a level that I don't think Vermont has talked about in the past. Burlington wants densification and wants housing. It is the answer to a lot of our challenges, but more housing means more toilets. More toilets means more wastewater. And when we looked at where the housing growth is most likely to occur, it was in the sewer shed of main plant, which is it's used up most of its capacity. And so part of this bond would actually be to increase the capacity at that location.
So when you think about the big new building in downtown, which is half built.
Yes, that one we already have capacity before,
Okay.
but when we start talking about the new housing units, as much as 5,000 new housing units, when we started mapping that out, we start to get too close to that upper limit of what our capacity is, and we needed to achieve more flexibility.
Understood.
Go ahead and go to the next slide. The other piece was, our lake. It's our jewel. There's lots that Vermont has to do to continue slowing down the wave of phosphorus, which is a nutrient that drives cyanogreen bacteria. But Burlington itself has its own standards, its own allocation of how much reductions that we need to do. And we're going to be achieving that by installing tertiary treatment at our largest facility, and making sure that we have completely turned the Burlington faucet off with regard to these cyanobacteria blooms. Doesn't mean those aren't going to happen, because Vermont is still contributing, but we will at least know that we've done our part, which is really critical for this. This was just, wanted to kind of show the trajectory of our bond. When we initially started talking with the council in November, this was the number we were working with, and we have worked really hard in collaboration with the council to get the money down. We'll go to the next slide. Just hopefully people have caught us at one of the very many meetings that we've gone to. From now until town meeting day, we're going to be going to more NPAs. We're visiting here with you. There's going to be a lot of information out there, website, tidbits, so that people can hopefully become fully educated before they go to vote. Next slide. This is sort of showing the long-range plan. I want to be really transparent with voters. I'm not trying to hide the ball, because we did shrink the number. But those other things that we took out, they haven't gone away. It's not like how we magically figured out that we don't need this piece of equipment or this pump. What we've done is stretch it out a little bit further, and we're focusing on these projects that are in stage one, which is primarily the main wastewater treatment plant, as well as some collection system or pipe work, and then focusing on some key improvements in our drinking water system, namely the replacement of the pump house. There's a cute little house on Main Street next to our 7 million gallon reservoir, and that contains all these really important pumps. If we do not have that pumps, if the floor in that building collapses, which it is starting to crack, it has been cracking, we can't get water to most of the upper elevation of Burlington east of Willard, and we also can't get water to the hospital. Hospitals need water.
That includes the fire station.
And the fire station.
We want to make sure you have water
He
still.
he needs water coming out of those hydrants, and we wouldn't be able to serve that. We're also making some improvements to the reservoir itself, the storage system, because that serves the whole city. It's actually our emergency storage. Over the past couple days, we've been doing work at the water treatment plant, and we have to shut the plant off. When we shut the plant off, where does the water come from? It comes from the storage. We have about 24 hours of storage in that, and it's very, very, very important to get us through whether it's planned or unplanned hiccups that may occur at the treatment plant. So, next slide.
I was going to say the slide that you showed earlier, Mayor, about the bonding capacity of the city and how the debt on the high schools start to decrease and these other things as these increase. So it seems important for voters to understand that there will be some declines in the money that we're paying on our municipal taxes and fees versus the increases that we're seeing.
Not necessarily on our side, and we can get into that.
But Laura, Glenn, to that point, for the property tax side
yes.
of it, the other thing, because either you have or you will have the school district in here as well. One important piece that people need to remember, and I know property taxpayers know this, is that 2/3 of the property tax bill that people receive for their homes, it goes to the state. And that education funding piece, we have finally in Burlington been able to get to a place where the per pupil formula is much fairer for Burlington in terms of the cost it takes to educate some of our students because if they are living within poverty or their English is not their first and primary language. And so finally the state formulas have been updated where now we're going to see that benefit to Burlington where we're able to draw more from the pot of money we contribute towards. And so that's going to help that 2/3 part of people's bill, which also are income sensitized due to state law. The third that is the GO bond would be impacting, again, property tax bills pay back the GO bond. That third is on the local side of it, which is what this will be generating. And what Megan's speaking to is, of course, on your water bill, which she'll get to in a minute about affordability.
Yep.
You just sort of wonder, like,
Yeah,
oh, well,
of
we
course.
had these bonds and we had these fees that we were paying, and are these on top of those fees, or are those fees declining? I mean,
I can get into a little bit of that, but if you want to
Keep going.
Yeah. Yes. So the rate projection that we're going to show you, which is just a forecast, I want to convey to people that it is conservative because we have included some of those further out projects that we're not putting in this bond, but they have to happen. I already have the price tag for them, and I know that they have to happen by a certain date. Those are part of the numbers that were in the original proposal in November. Again, those haven't gone away, and because they haven't gone away, when we look at what is a fairly steep rate increase over time, those are included.
I just want to let our camera person know we're going to need 5 more minutes on top of that. So I think we have 10 minutes
Okay.
left.
Let's go to the next slide. We've sliced and diced as much as we can. We're now looking at a drinking water bond of $20 million and a lake bond, which is the wastewater and stormwater, of $152 million. Next slide. I think you can skip this, other than to say that we're going to be working in collaboration with the council to make sure at the end of the day, before this project goes out to bid, that it is the right project, that all of the costs have been considered, that there's nothing fluffy in there. It's the stuff that the city needs to move forward. And you can go with the next slide.
Are fluffy things ever included in bonds?
From my perspective, no. But I think the public deserves to know that we're not picking, gold-plated faucets for our bathrooms. We're getting something that's going to work and be durable, but not be fancy.
And I have to say, I did a tour of the wastewater treatment plant, the main plant. I highly recommend everyone do that. I'm sure we're going to do at least one more tour
absolutely.
before town meeting day. It's eye-opening. It's a little smelly, but that's one of the things we'll work on with this bond. But they really are, with pipes and things that still have some sort of shelf life, they are really doing quite the task of making sure that they're doing everything they can to retrofit, to make things extend their lives if it's safe and possible. But it also really puts into stark reality how much of our system doesn't have a duplication, a repetitive part to it, that in case something goes down, we can still run a responsible plan and make sure we're treating everything. Yeah. So it was very eye-opening. I encourage people to check that out.
I think we have a video tour of that.
Yes, they did actually.
They talked about that.
Yep.
They were very proud to have Town Meeting TV down at the plant.
Yeah, so I'm sure we're running that.
Exactly. we can go back to the slide. You can skip this one just to say we're doing everything we can to reduce the impact. And then I want to make sure all of the viewers out there know that we already have an affordability program. Now, it is targeted for people who already receive some sort of state or federal benefit based on their income. But if you do receive one of those benefits and you show us proof of that, we're going to give you a discount on your water bill. We're really excited to work with the City Council about what expansions look like, including potentially offering some sort of indirect assistance to renters. Renters don't pay their water bill, but they pay a electric bill, and we think we can work with the electric department to get money in their pockets to offset what would be the potential impact of these rate increases on their rent. So lots to come on that. We want people to not have to choose between meeting an essential need like medicine or food and paying their water bill on time.
It's really coming to that for a lot of people.
It is, and we know that. And we know that the folks that we're able to help right now, that there's a tranche of people above them who aren't necessarily getting help from other programs. And that this next enhancement, I think we're really going to be looking hard at those folks and figuring out how we can help them without having too much administrative burden. Okay, next slide. When all is said and done, though, there are going to be increases. We are looking at a potential increase of up to 89% over this 5-year time period. That's not all going to happen at once. It's going to happen over a series of annual increases, and this is what it would look like for a typical family household who uses 400 cubic feet a month. So your current bill's around $59, not including the city franchise fee, and then it would be going up about $10, $11, so on and so forth.
Per month.
Per month, yes.
Or per quarter.
Nope, per month. We pay. We read the meters monthly, and so people do get charged monthly.
How do our water rates compare with the Champlain Water District?
With the Champlain Water District, I can't say because they're a wholesaler, but we did, and I don't have that graph. We looked at what our rates look like or our typical bill compared to surrounding Vermont towns as well as other New England towns, and we're actually, I was a little surprised, we're actually below the median of the towns that we looked at. I've already looked at some, I think South Burlington, they had some significant rate increases that are proposed for FY26. And so I don't think we're going to be alone with any system that is stewarding their infrastructure properly. They're coming due on these investments, and they may also be looking at bonds and rate increases. I just can't predict right now.
Yeah, I mean, I was just talking to the Grand Isle Water District, and if you use no water, you have to pay $150 in debt service a quarter just using no water.
Just to have access to this. Yes, a lot of systems are putting in fixed fees because there is a fixed cost of just being ready to serve, whether you go to Florida and you don't turn your water on, or you're there using the water. They are real costs. I think that was the main thing, other than the summary. But yeah, these investments are extremely important. We have more work to do, which is sort of that big long-term sustainability plan. I just want to be clear to folks that we may have to be coming back. Our debt service, we actually have debt service from that last time that maybe you were talking about bonds. That still remains on our books, and we actually aren't paying off until 2034 because of decisions made by long ago administrations.
To stretch it out.
Yes. Well, there was a balloon payment, and folks didn't save for the balloon payment, and so they had to refinance. But it is challenging for me because we will be ripping out infrastructure that we are still paying for.
So just to recap, there's a lake bond.
Yep.
Which is $152 million.
Yes.
It's a revenue bond, so
Yes.
it requires 50% vote.
Yes.
And a water bond, which
$20 million.
you called it something else, not just a water bond, drinking water bond.
Drinking water, yes. So it's
50%.
Yep.
It's also a revenue bond, and that's for $20 million. And that will support the pump station and high priority projects, and the lake bond will be an overhaul of the wastewater treatment plant.
Focusing on the wastewater treatment plant, a little bit of money for some satellite pump stations for pipes in the ground. And then the balance on the stormwater side as well is to do additional combined sewer overflow abatement projects.
Got it. And then we have a GO bond, also known as a GO bond, or general obligation bond, and that is $20 million, requires 2/3 vote to support the aging fleet, traffic calming, sidewalks, streets, and things that people need in terms of the infrastructure of the city.
Buildings.
Buildings.
Projects.
Yeah, projects. Wonderful. Okay, so we're going to remind people, I'm going to wait to remind people, any closing comments?
Well, I just want to remind voters that in order for us to meet our three major priorities in this community, which is having an adequate and responsive community safety system that can respond and send the right kind of people and have the infrastructure and facilities to support the people who do those first responder jobs. We need the GO bond. In order to advance our housing, dire need of housing and the densification of housing, the building of more housing, we really need our lake bond. And for us to really be able to push our final priority of climate and doing our part, as Megan said, we really need that lake bond. And so there's elements of all three that really help advance these priorities. And I want folks to really know there's a deep commitment by this administration for being laser focused on affordability. And one thing you will not see on the ballot is a request of voters to increase the general rate tax. That is something that is required by council and mayor to go to voters to increase that rate tax. We've had rate tax increases in recent years. It was very important to me to make sure we did not deliver that at the same time asking for voters' consideration of these bonds. That requires us to sharpen our pencils around the fiscal year 26 budget, which is we're well in it right now, but that's our next piece of making sure that we're, what I talked about when I first became mayor, truly right-sizing the operational side of our budget so that we are not just talking about affordability, but delivering budgets we can't sustain, but truly talking about finding affordability programs through our water program, our water utility, our electric utility, but starting to also look at the municipal side of the tax bill for affordability. And that's around being responsible about any tax increases we ask for, but then also looking at what other things we've been doing. So the last thing I'll just say is today, the Tax Fairness Working Group just started its first meeting. This is a group that will meet for the next 6 months to look at what other policy can we start to think about around how we collect revenue in the city that's fair and equitable to those people who live here. I know cost of living is a real struggle and burden to many people in this city, and we want to maintain our economic diversity and not lose people for the cost of living here. And so that's for both renters and for people who own property. So that's what we're diving deep into well beyond this particular ballot on Town Meeting Day.
Well, I want to thank the three of you so much for being with us, Mayor, Chief, and Megan Moir, head of the water czar.
All things liquid.
All things liquid. Thank you very much for watching, and please don't forget to vote on the 4th of March, 2025. Stay tuned here at Town Meeting TV for more Town Meeting coverage.